Imagine a world where a single man's ambition could lead to the downfall of an entire kingdom, where knights fought not just for glory but for survival, and where a teenage queen could hold the fate of nations in her hands. This is the story of a time long ago, a time of war, intrigue, and dramatic changes in Europe. It's a story of a man named Bonet, who wrote a book that spoke the harsh truths about war, and a young queen named Isabeau, whose marriage to the King of France would become one of the most tragic unions in history. In the 14th century, Europe was a place of constant conflict. Wars were fought not just between kingdoms but also within them. The church was divided, and the people suffered. Bonet, a wise and thoughtful man, wrote a book called The Tree of Battles to address the chaos and suffering he saw around him. He was a monk who believed that war should not harm those who do not make war. He was heartbroken by the way poor laborers, who worked the fields and provided food for everyone, were often the ones who suffered the most. Bonet argued that farmers, merchants, and shepherds should be protected during times of war because they were essential to everyone's survival. Bonnet's ideas were revolutionary for his time. He questioned whether it was right to take prisoners from among the enemy's farmers and shepherds. He believed that these people should be left alone to continue their work, which benefited all of society. He wrote about the rights of knights, including their wages and sick pay, and he discussed whether it was better to die in battle or to flee. Bonnet's book was dedicated to Charles VI, the young King of France, who would soon find himself at the center of a great tragedy. While Bonet was writing his book, a young man named Charles VI was growing up in a world of politics and war. Charles was the son of Charles V, a king who had tried to bring peace to France, but had also left behind a kingdom that was still deeply divided. When Charles VI became king at the age of 11, he was surrounded by powerful uncles who had their own interests in mind. These uncles, particularly Philip the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, pushed Charles to be more aggressive in war, hoping to use his military prowess for their own gain. One of the most significant events in Charles's early reign was his marriage to Isabeau of Bavaria. Isabeau was a young German princess who was chosen as Charles's bride for political reasons. The marriage was meant to strengthen France's position against England, which was a constant threat. However, the road to this marriage was not smooth. Isabeau's grandfather, Bernabo Visconti, was a powerful ruler in Italy who had many enemies, including his own nephew, Gian Galeazzo. Gian Galeazzo, who was known for his intelligence and cunning, decided to take drastic action to secure his power. In 1385, Gian Galeazzo invited his uncle Bernabo to a meeting outside Milan, claiming he wanted to make a pilgrimage. Bernabo, who was overconfident and careless, agreed to meet his nephew. When they met, Gian Galeazzo had his men seize Bernabo and take him prisoner. This shocking act of betrayal sent ripples throughout Europe. Bernabo was later imprisoned and died under mysterious circumstances, and Gian Galeazzo became the ruler of Milan. The news of Bernabo's downfall reached the young Isabeau, who was preparing to marry Charles VI. Isabeau, who was only 15 at the time, was deeply affected by the news. She vowed to seek revenge against Gian Galeazzo, a promise that would have far-reaching consequences. Isabeau arrived in France in the summer of 1385, after being tutored in French customs and language. She met Charles VI in Amiens, and the young king was immediately smitten with her. They were married in a lavish ceremony, and the early days of their marriage were filled with passion and excitement. However, this happiness was short-lived. Charles, who was known for his impulsiveness and lack of steadiness, soon grew disenchanted with Isabeau. His unstable nature, which was partly due to his family's history of mental illness, began to show. Isabeau, on the other hand, was determined to assert her influence and seek revenge against her enemies. The marriage of Charles VI and Isabeau of Bavaria was a turning point in French history. Charles, who had been encouraged by his uncles to be more aggressive in war, decided to send a French force to Scotland to help the Scots fight against the English. The French, led by Admiral de Vienne, arrived in Scotland in the summer of 1385, bringing with them a significant amount of money and weapons. However, the conditions in Scotland were far worse than they had expected. The Scottish castles were bare and gloomy, and the people lived in primitive conditions. The French knights, used to the comfort and luxury of their own homes, were shocked by the poverty and harsh living conditions. The Scottish nobles, who were already resentful of the French presence, became even more displeased when the French began to engage in romantic affairs with local women. Admiral de Vienne, in particular, had a scandalous affair with a cousin of the Scottish king, which nearly led to his death. The French, frustrated by the lack of action and the harsh conditions, eventually left Scotland without achieving their goals. Back in France, the young King Charles VI was facing his own challenges. His uncles, who had been controlling the government, began to clash with each other, and the kingdom was once again plunged into political turmoil. Charles, who was now in his late teens, tried to assert his authority, but his mental health was beginning to deteriorate. He suffered from periods of madness, during which he would become violent and paranoid. His wife, Isabeau, took advantage of these moments to increase her own power and influence. As Charles's condition worsened, Isabeau became more and more involved in the affairs of the kingdom. She used her position to seek revenge against those who had wronged her, particularly Gian Galeazzo of Milan. She also began to form alliances with powerful nobles, including the Duke of Burgundy, who had been one of Charles's uncles. Isabeau's influence grew to the point where she was effectively ruling France alongside her increasingly unstable husband. The marriage of Charles VI and Isabeau of Bavaria, which had started with so much promise, became one of the most tragic unions in history. Charles's mental health continued to decline, and he became known as the Mad King. Isabeau, who had once been a young and innocent princess, became a powerful and ruthless queen. Her desire for revenge and her political ambitions led to a series of events that would have far-reaching consequences for France and the rest of Europe. In the end, the story of Charles VI and Isabeau of Bavaria is a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition, the consequences of political intrigues, and the tragic fate of those who are caught in the crossfire of power struggles. It is a story that reminds us of the importance of empathy, the value of protecting the vulnerable, and the devastating impact of war on ordinary people. Bonnet's words, written so long ago, still echo through the ages, reminding us that the true measure of a society is how it treats its weakest members.